Hello. Hello to everyone joining us today. My name is Gary Gavrilov. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Humans in the Loop. And again, thank you very much for coming to what will hopefully be the first of many interesting sessions organized by our team at HITL. For those of you whom we've not had the pleasure of meeting before, I would like to give a bit of insight into what our organization is and the values that we stand for. I'd also like to touch on our role in the AI industry and how we hope to influence the development and the use of AI systems across multiple industries. So Humans in the Loop was created in 2017 by our founder and our CEO, Eva Gumnishka. And our mission is to provide conflict-affected and displaced people with access to career development support, upskilling, and also remote work opportunities to train and monitor AI systems. At the moment, we are proud to work with a large and diverse team of annotators spread across the globe with experience in multiple types of data annotation and classification, as well as real-time monitoring and support of production AI systems. This series of webinars is something that we as a team have wanted to do for a long time, and it's finally coming to fruition. This is, in a way, our way of giving back to the community by sharing stories and insights from our ever-growing number of partners, customers, and friends across the industry. You can expect to see more in the way of real-world use cases, behind the curtains peek at some of the most interesting AI projects that we get to work on as an organization, and also expert opinions on the most recent trends in our domain. So today we have an especially interesting opportunity because our guest is the widely recognized and respected Robert Monarch. So Robert is a name that is familiar to most, if not all, AI practitioners in the industry. And this is due in part to his foundational book, Human in the Loop Machine Learning, subtitled Active Learning and Annotation for Human-Centered AI, but also due in a big way to his pioneering work in the application of machine learning to disaster response, disaster relief efforts, which have taken him across the globe to places like Sierra Leone, Haiti, and Liberia. So with that, I will take a brief pause and just give our guest the opportunity to log in, and I will check back momentarily, and we will start with our discussion. So wherever you are across the globe, take your morning coffee, or put this on in the car on your morning commute, or your afternoon snack, or even your after dinner drink. Sit back, and hopefully you'll get to enjoy a wonderful discussion. Thank you, and we'll be back in a brief minute.
Hello, everybody. I might be another Gary on your screen, but I can assure you I'm Rob Monarch.
I believe we're both on. Rob, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Great to have you. Hopefully everything is working fine for everyone. And if not, please let us know in the questions prompt, the little chat window, the middle of your screen on Zoom. And Rob, so I guess due to some just technical hiccups, I gave a brief introduction of Humans in the Loop and a brief introduction of you. And actually my intention was to actually kind of ask you whether, my intro does justice to your career, your expertise.
I saw that, and you did. I appreciate it.
Oh, great. Great. So is that how you like to be portrayed or be introduced? Does my introduction do justice to your career and your expertise in the realm of AI?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, I feel like I've had two careers, one in disaster advanced, one in AI in parallel, and yeah, in many ways they still overlap, but most of the time I am here working as an engineer in Silicon Valley, or specifically I'm in San Francisco right now. And obviously I read the book on human in the loop machine learning because I thought it was a very important gap in the literature, probably the most important and interesting and most complicated part of AI. So yeah, I'm happy to be able to talk about it with a group of people here who I imagine are well, I imagine I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure people attending here are very interested in this topic too.
I'm sure we actually have a fairly diverse audience. So I'm hoping that this discussion will have a little bit for everyone involved. And we're happy to take questions from all of you at the end of the session. But to kick us off, I mean, Rob, given that, we at Humans in the Loop and also the majority of our audience is made up of people who in one way or another earn their living with AI in various capacities. So we consider ourselves as having, reasonable expertise in the field. However, at the same time, we're also human, and as such, we can't help but be influenced by this overwhelming stream of news and content about the constant innovation in the field of AI, this ever-growing list of amazing tools, platforms, capabilities that promise to, disrupt and bring big change for better or worse. So do you mind giving us your 50,000-foot view of the AI landscape?
Yeah, sure. So it's funny, contrary to what a lot of people have said, I think it's easier to get into AI now than it has been in the past. Primarily because on the algorithm side, the number of technical approaches we have are really converged. So for my more academic focused background in NLP, there used to be one very specific set of technologies for doing things like machine translation, another again for like sequence tagging, like named entity recognition, a bunch of different ways you might do text categorization, a completely different set of algorithms for things like speech to text. And now a lot of these have really converged on basically neural nets and to a certain extent still some decision tree based approaches in the industry. But what it means is that now you can come into this industry and take papers from very, very different areas and increasingly multimodal across text, speech, and computer vision. And what you learn from one can apply to another. So the set of techniques that you need to learn are much smaller. So it means you can ramp up in one area and work across multiple areas much faster. So I think that's really exciting. I think that that's the most exciting part about all the so-called advances in AI. I think there have always been really good, really important incremental advances on the algorithm side of things. And while I don't think there's a revolution in the capabilities of the algorithmic side of AI at the moment, I do think to an extent there is that now we have a shared language. And of course, what that also means with more people working in an AI, they're all contributing to a common pool of AI knowledge rather than a lot of different subdisciplines.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear the take of someone who was really waist deep in the industry, as opposed to someone who is a fairly new entrant or focused in one particular field and not have this broad sort of overview across multiple disciplines as you do. Because really, truly, when you say, I don't think there's a revolution coming, obviously you've seen the incremental changes that have brought us to this point. But if you're just a person, even within the industry, looking at the headlines, you will get the feeling that we're in the middle of a new gold rush, right? Or a new web.com boom or something similar. And it's not, I guess, my place or our place to pass judgment on whether that's beneficial or not. But Do you feel that there is this sense of like a gold rush for certain industries, maybe to AI?
Yeah, I mean for I guess more than a decade now, more and more industries are bringing on AI powered tools. And in a lot of cases, they've already been there, but more, kind of more in the background. I think it entered the kind of consumer mind in kind of in two ways. The first was the biggest hype cycle I've seen since coming to Silicon Valley, which is when IBM Watson won Jeopardy. The current hype cycle is not as big, but it's a second out of many I've seen. And I think the second way that entered the consumer mind after Jeopardy was when people started seeing AI in the products that they were using every day. It was always there in products like search engines. Well, not always, but for more than 10 years. But no one really thought of search engines as AI for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But when people started having more than naive autocomplete on their phones, when people started having smart devices in their houses that could understand them, I think that's when there was just a general consumer comfort to what had already been in more on the enterprise side of things with AI. And so on top of that, when there are advances in AI, now they are more likely to make the news as well. So that can obviously inflate some of the some of the narrative and popular focus in different parts of AI.
Sure. For me, being part of that generation that really grew up with certain technologies that we take for granted already, I think that the test has been always, whether my parents can use it and understand it, and because they're in their mid 60s, God bless their souls. And it turns out that my father has been subscribed to this, I guess, prompt service. So he's paying for this API, and he's making calls to whether it's OpenAI's ChatGPT or a similar LLM. But he's a historian, so he's using that to actually create prompts for himself and help him along with book translations and these articles that he's pushing out. So I think as far as that test goes, I think it's proven, it's validated.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, and it's great to see some people come in and be able to create and do things beyond what for a long time has been kind of like basics, like searching and question answer type services. It's nice that you don't need a technical background to be, well, don't need a computer science technical background to be able to come in and do interesting work.
Right.
With AI assistance.
Right. So kind of related to that, I had this question. So as any practitioner of like magic, quote in quotes, when you perform an illusion in front of an audience, you have to create misdirection, right? So you focus the attention of the observer to one spot while the real magic takes place elsewhere on the scene. So do you think that the general public and maybe even professionals in the industry are overly like focused on like a few elements in the industry, such as generative AI models? And actually, where do you think the real magic is happening in the domain of AI? And what should we be paying attention to, if not, these large language models that are making the headlines?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and it's kind of a leading question because obviously my answer is going to say we're not looking as close as possible as we should at the human side, but yeah, I think also to extend the analogy, if you're trying to follow what a magician is doing, you should try to keep your eye on everything, because something's been put into a pocket or taken out somewhere. So yeah, like people should keep their eye on generative AI. I feel like that's already fizzing a little bit here. A lot of big initiatives are already being wound down in generative AI. I'm seeing here in Silicon Valley, because there just aren't as many compelling use cases as some of the media might have led us to believe.
Yeah.
But I think a constant theme is I've seen like for 20 years now is that the human side and creating good training data is overlooked relative to the algorithm side. I think most of the increases on the algorithm side, are the result of advances in material science rather than computer science, which has got bigger and cheaper compute, and so we're able to converge bigger models. A lot of smart innovation has gone into getting the most out of how can we converge those models as cheaply as possible. I think even today, like add in thousands and thousands of hours of compute will increase the accuracy on a lot of tasks, less than adding a couple of hours of human feedback in order to tune models. And I think that's true even with generative AI. So it's been kind of buried, but most of the big tune generative AI systems are built on a lot of human labeled data. For something recent like ChatGPT, they specifically tuned the data with I think it's like tens of thousands of instances of human feedback of what like good responses should be and ranking responses. So these smart chatbots are like the I'm sure the one that your father is using and writing prompts for. It works because it has been trained on very manual human feedback about what should be returned from a given prompt. And so I think that's just a really exciting side of things. And I mean, like I say in my book, since AI has first been around, people have said, "Oh, labeling's dead." We've through this unsupervised or semi-supervised or reinforcement or child teacher model, where we're going to get rid of human labels, and that's never really happened. To the extent that a very small number of tasks have done away with most of the need for human labels, the rate at which we're discovering new ways to apply AI is getting much larger. So I don't think there's going to be any shortage of the need for human training data and feedback and model guidance in the future.
Well, this thank you very much for this insight and actually for taking this direction in your response, because I think for us as an organization, and also a big element of your book and in your book, and it resonates deeply with us as an organization. Even it's reflected in our name, humans in the loop. I have a sort of maybe again, it's a bit of a leading question, but okay. So, do you have any practical advice for companies that already have AI systems in production and are now struggling to implement efficient monitoring or validation or active learning protocols?
Right. So with human validation, you mean not?
Yes.
Not
yeah. That's right.
Automated. Yeah. It's interesting. There's not that big an uptake of companies doing real-time human monitoring and updating of models. A lot of the basic infrastructure in machine learning, like MLOps, is really around batch rather than real-time updates to machine learning models. And I think if you spoke to most people who were running large machine learning models in production, they would agree that there'd be benefits in making more incremental updates to their models. However, there's a lot that needs to come with that. Depending on the time it takes to retrain your model, you might be making choices about training just some layers for faster retraining, and then maybe having a kind of like batch in the background and subbing out the model. And then that also creates inconsistency. So if you have a model in production, and let's say it's for something like a search engine, something ubiquitous, you'll get the same results over time without subbing out your model. And if you're updating every day, it's going to be really hard to interpret what the changes are, and what additional features you made at the same time that you added training data actually resulted in model improvements. So it becomes the transparency of your model becomes an issue as well. So I think there's just a lot of fundamental things stopping real-time human feedback going back into the training data. But there is a lot more interest in areas where it might be a use case that backs off to humans. So one area that I've seen this most widely used is in like supply chain logistics, manufacturing, where you have AI monitoring, and if something is a little bit off, or the AI is not confident, or it's an outlier for whatever kind of active learning type reason, it backs off to a human, and it's a human that actually provides the judgment there. So one of the more concrete use cases, which I speak about in my book, is robots identifying empty shelves in a supermarket. So they'll go around maybe at night to work out what shelves need to be restocked. Computer vision will be able to work out what some of these are, but it can be complicated. Is a shelf empty because it's out of stock, or there was no stock there to begin with? Is the sign clear enough for OCR to read about what that product should have been, or is it like occluded or missing somehow? And so you can see areas where you might want to back off to a human. And this is time critical because the human might ask the robot to move around a little bit, get different angles, but that robot has to move on and before the store opens, look at every single shelf. And so so I think back to your original question, if you're a company thinking about doing real-time human engagement with the models, this kind of validation of like, is the model doing what I think it's doing, is a really good place to start before you then think about everything that needs to change in your tech stack to also do that training data update in real time.
Okay, well, that's great advice, and thank you for taking the time to really answer it in such depth. I have a bit of a related question. So the use cases that you mentioned in supply chain logistics, for example, and manufacturing, those in my mind are industries and use cases where it's fairly not easy, but it's straightforward to calculate and find this balance between the cost of implementing such a system or such a workflow versus the cost of a manufacturing process grinding to a halt, or a shelf running, staying empty for a half of a sales day, or some freight vehicle being stuck or not finding the container that it's supposed to, thereby delaying the shipment itself. So, but there are also industries where these effects are much harder to calculate, and also industries where the cost is actually human. So for example, healthcare, right? So if you have a system engaged in, let's say, patient monitoring, I'm struggling to formulate my question, but I guess because it's a question that touches on several different aspects. So I guess at some point it will be a balance between like the perception of the ethics of it, having a machine learning system monitor your relative in the hospital versus a real nurse or a real doctor. And also, I guess I don't want to say political or legal, but I guess the regulatory aspect of this. Can you make any comment? And I promise I won't hold you to it, because I realize these things are beyond our control or our grasp, so, in many ways.
Yeah. So I think on the regulatory side, like I'm happy to go out on a limb and say we need way more regulations and and standards and guidance. And we actually we have some already that I think get overlooked and that we can build on. So there is already an ISO standard for what's called post-edited in machine translation. Human translation. So in human translation, post-editing means that machine translation has already created a translation, then human translator or interpreter is editing that machine learning output, the machine translated text. And a lot of the things that we worry about in AI more broadly have been looked at by the people working on the standards. And these are experts from the human translation industry who have long thought about, purely from the human side of things, well, what are the ethical implications? Like, who can translate? How qualified do you need to be? How different does it need to be in a medical context versus a political context versus a context that might not be as sensitive? Right. And when it comes to post editing, like what are the implications for the increased speed at which the human is working with the AI assistants and the compensation that can come from that? Are there concerns about how a human is more likely to trust a certain machine translation system, including the errors leading to worse overall translations? And how might all of these then in turn apply to areas where machine translation happens to be less accurate? And machine translation will tend to be worse in less widely spoken languages. And speakers of less widely spoken languages are disproportionately more likely to be ethnic minorities or less wealthy, which means that the biases that you have can be amplified more among already potentially more oppressed or disadvantaged populations. And so, so seeing this for like these conversations happen in it's very kind of off to the side for some people, machine translation industry, I think there's a lot that that we can learn there and take to other use cases. So that's what I feel about the regulatory side. We need more of it, and there's a lot of interesting things which are already there, which I think aren't on a lot of people's radar. Then thinking back to like specific use cases, like a lot of the ones like you mentioned, like in healthcare I've worked in before. A lot of those cases tend to be the most valuable and can mitigate a lot of the risks when it's AI assisting a human rather than replacing a human. There's not, I don't know of any medical imaging companies which are replacing physicians. I know a lot which are thinking really hard about, okay, a physician is already analyzing certain data points. How can we make smarter tools? And something like I personally seen, going to a doctor, seeing an ultrasound for one of my kids before they were born, and the screen was colored by some basic AI rather than just being a black and white ultrasound based on what I thought the different materials were. So that was really cool. And so that's helping, in this case, both the patients and the medical practitioners interpret the data, but it's augmenting what they're doing. And so then in those cases, you can think about, okay, how does this maybe increase the efficiency of someone in their work without a noticeable impact on their accuracy, or maybe both. So maybe AI can also help in identifying potential human error, and so result in humans which are both more efficient and have less errors overall. Well, as you can probably see here, the sun has just risen in San Francisco, and it's shining in my face. So at some point, I might have to put a blind down.
That's perfectly fine, because the sun is actually setting over here in Sofia, Bulgaria. So.
Oh, well, we're looking at that. All right. Different sides of the sun.
So yeah, absolutely, and a good illustration of how broad the AI world is. Over there, the sun is rising. Here, it's setting. Metaphorically, I don't think so, but yeah, still a nice observation. But yeah, I mean, you definitely touched on actually preempted a couple of questions that I had, because for us at Humans in the Loop, we are a ethical AI-oriented company, and this is part of our core values and our mission. And there are some very practical terms in which we put that into action, like we follow a strict fair work policy, where we compensate our annotators fairly and transparently, and also equally with no bias for gender, religion, location, etc. We also do not take any projects in the defense and military or surveillance and data or content censorship domain in general. And my question was actually going to be like, are there other like hidden ethical costs in the development or the application of AI? And you kind of answered that question to a large extent already. But do you have any other practical advice for companies which are using to leverage AI, not necessarily involved in the development of an AI product or system themselves, but looking to leverage it, and they fall short of accounting for all of these hidden ethical costs that may end up at some point, getting back to them, right? Like sports shoes companies using extremely underpaid labor halfway across the world, and at some point that comes back as negative PR, for example. And that's a very cynical illustration, but perhaps you may have a better one for me.
Yeah, and I think the labor question in AI and creating training data is a really, really important one. You've touched on some of the areas where it's really complicated. So content moderation and government surveillance. So these areas that I'll tend not to work in as well, because of the application of one and potential trauma people can be experienced by working the other. Yeah. But in general, for almost all AI use cases, it is the economically right decision to employ people fairly. So it's not a trade-off where you're trying to get the cheapest possible labels in order to have the best training data for your business in the majority of cases. And this kind of like zero-sum game view is an incorrect one, but it's still a ubiquitous one. So I think people are right to focus on areas where people are being exploited in an industry and in data labeling included. But for me at least, so when I was CTO of Figure 8 at that time, with the biggest data labeling company here in Silicon Valley, and every time we had a project come in where at short notice we needed high quality training data, our most trusted partners were the ones who, just like humans in the loop, paid fair wages, assured transparency, assured people had the ability to advance in their career, to choose to the extent the projects were available, the projects that they worked on. And so the fairest and the most high paid workers were also the best, because of the security they had in their jobs. They were producing much more high quality training data, and by the time you factor in all the quality control or relabeling you'd need to do if you're otherwise just trying to go for volume with like anonymous crowdsourced workers, it ended up being as cheap or cheaper than trying to scale this. And a lot of people who mature in the industry have seen this. So again, as I say in my book, I worked at AWS. I launched AWS's first NLP services, and even though we had Mechanical Turk with anonymous crowdsourced workers literally one floor above our Seattle office, we used fairly paid third-party contractors more for our training data than in-house because of the reliability. So I think I think you'll see all the mature players in the space, or hopefully most of them, understand that this is the right way to get people to build their training data. But there's certainly a public perception, especially in academic circles, that you're really just trying to get the most for your money on a per label basis.
Yeah, definitely. And here's to hoping that we see this change for the better, instead of for the worse, as different, automation platforms and tools become more prevalent, like
Yeah, I
segment
hope so
anything,
too.
which,
If you're building, yeah. So like, I mean, just to build on this, like I feel if you're building a machine learning model, you have responsibility to everyone who's working for you, and that will include someone who's labeling your data. So like I say in my book as well, like if you're building a model and you work with a third-party vendor, like find out what people are getting paid. Like, does that pay include the time in between projects? If it's like a country like the US, where a lot of healthcare is employment-based, do they get access to healthcare? How is what they're getting paid situated relative to a living wage in a given location? And especially if it's like skilled work, and a lot of it is, how much more than just a living wage is somebody getting paid. And these are things that are your obligation as someone who's building a model and someone working for you, and in whatever that employment relationship looks like, even if it's an outsourced contractor. And it will result in better data as well. It really is a win-win situation.
Yeah, and it's good, and makes me happy to hear you say that. And it really, I want to use that as a segue to kind of take us into a more positive, direction in our conversation, because you've been quite successful in harnessing the power of machine learning and AI for good, with your efforts in adapting, ML applications for disaster response, disaster relief efforts in Sierra Leone, Liberia, Haiti, and a couple other locations in the Amazon, if I'm not mistaken. So can you share with us, like, what are some interesting applications of AI for the good of mankind that may have gone under our radar,
Like I said right at the start, my background has been in disaster response, and also documenting endangered or indigenous languages. That was in parallel to working in AI for the early parts of my career. So as an undergraduate, I studied AI, and I published a couple of papers in AI, but then wasn't sure that was actually going to be part of my career. And then I worked in areas like documenting indigenous languages. When I worked in Sierra Leone and Liberia, it's for the UN High Commission for Refugees, but it wasn't in AI. We're installing solar power systems at schools and clinics supported in refugee camps. When I was in the Amazon, it was to study a language called Matses, which was said to be a language without recursion. That is very complicated tense and compounded system for suffixes. And so all of these things were separate to my AI career. It was when I was in Liberia, working right on the edge of Cote d'Ivoire, when I saw AI could help, because at that time, a lot of refugees were coming across the border into a neighboring valley from Cote d'Ivoire. We weren't able to work out how many there were. Could have been 10, could have been 10,000. We were the only UNHCR people there. So like people come up to us, like it says refugee agency on the UN truck. We're installing solar power systems. We didn't have a way to really understand how many people were there. And people would have had cell phones. They would have been bouncing their signals off the same towers that I was with my phone. And so, in a very practical sense, we're connected to these people. We had no way to reach them directly. And even if we did, they could have spoken any number of languages for which we had no way to easily like translate or communicate with them. And so it kind of made me understand that, okay, like we've done a really good job of connecting everybody. But we're not doing a very good job of providing smart language services, many of which are AI powered, to the world's broader languages. And so when I first came into the US, which was to go to graduate school, my PhD in natural language processing at Stanford. My advisor was Chris Menin, who is now the head of the AI lab there. The focus of my dissertation was on adapting NLP to low resource languages. And I did that in health and disaster response contexts. And in the case of disaster response, in disasters that I actually responded to and helped with rebuilding. And so that's kind of how I ended up still working in those two areas. Most recently with the COVID response. So I was advising World Health Organization and various governments on how they could or how not to use AI for certain things that they were doing. In terms of
and this actually sounds like, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, but it sounds like a great idea for a lecture at the very least, and maybe a full year course at a university, how not to use AI systems, you know, for C-level management, especially.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and yeah, it really is. And I didn't come on here to plug it, but
But please take the opportunity.
It's
will be our
yeah. So
pleasure.
I'm the lecturer for an upcoming course at Deep Learning AI. It'll be on Coursera as well. So it's Andrew Ng, who was a professor at Stanford when I was a grad student there. He does these very popular online courses. I imagine a lot of people here would already be familiar with them. And this one is on AI for good. And I forget if the syllabus is up there already, but we're focused on a few different areas.
I was about to ask whether we can check out the syllabus, see what the prerequisites are for.
Yeah, it's announced on their side. I forget if the syllabus is announced, but broadly we're working on areas like disaster response, climate change, and pollution detection, so like particle detection in the air. So these are all like very good practical use cases. And then back to your point about when not to do AI. Most of what this course will be recommending is what you need to look for and decide before you launch an AI product. So it might be the first and maybe last course where we'll keep hammering home that the majority of your ideas should not be put into practice because of the potential to do harm. And I begin with an example in this course, or I will begin with an example. We haven't recorded it yet, of a use case I worked in healthcare, trying to make people doing remote assistance for people who are about to give birth or in the first 2 years of their kids' lives, give them like healthcare advice and answer their questions. And this was in rural Nigeria. And we worked really hard. We minimize a lot of the risks around privacy or bad information, or letting AI make a decision that should go to a human. And despite this, we weren't able to get an uptake from the people using this. They weren't able. We could see that AI was making them more efficient, but they weren't experiencing that, and they felt like they were becoming people who are training data rather than working as healthcare professionals. And so because their experience of the product wasn't right, we didn't move forward with it. So you know, I think this is a great example of how you can get absolutely everything right, as far as we knew, from like a good use case where we worked really hard to mitigate all the potential downsides, and still the product fit wasn't there. And it's now you know, like 7 or 8 years since we did this, that this same system is called Europort, it's part of UNICEF, is actually starting to use AI successfully to augment the humans doing this. And so, you know, it's hard. Like you can take a long time to get any product to be successfully adopted. So if you're you know, working in AI, you have added complexity of, you know, like more moving parts than a lot of other software. And especially if you're working in sensitive areas like healthcare and to populations that have historically been really disadvantaged and oppressed, then there is a lot that really needs to go into the decision about whether AI is the right tool to help address a given problem. And not to be too negative about no that's I mean those are in a webinar for an AI company, but I think it's good to be realistic.
No, I mean, I absolutely agree that we need to be realistic. But these are also the themes and the topics that we need to be talking about. And one of the things that actually came up in my mind and in discussion with our team was, if we take a really, perhaps make a generalization and say that the bulk of the development, the research in the field of AI is happening within, well-developed first world economies. Do you think, and this obviously underrepresents a lot of developing economies across the world, right? And communities and peoples living in those countries and regions. Do you think that this fact, and if not due to this fact, the AI industry alone will accelerate this sort of this disparity, I guess, or this big margin in terms of quality of life, standard of living, opportunities for success between Western economies, for example, and developing economies?
Yeah, I think it's true in general that any technology advances, if we're not mindful about their impacts and how they're applied, can disproportionately benefit people who are already wealthy. That's not specific to AI, but AI is certainly one of the cases where that can be true. And again, to build on my area of natural language processing, there are some very obvious examples there. So search engines have worked well in English, and software is built in English, but really early on, there's a lot of search for search engines and a lot of general NLP tools, which were based around English. So very standardized spelling across all of English's variants across so many countries, very predictable word order, and very few prefixes and suffixes. So in linguistics, we call that morphology, and like the actual term for English is morphologically impoverished. we have some suffixes for verbs, and I mean we have a bunch of suffixes and prefixes, just not many compared to other languages. And so what this means that baked into the assumptions of so many early language technologies were that an individual word with fairly invariant spelling is the good fundamental feature that you can build a model on, and the sequence is highly predictive. And this is we see this all the way through to today with generative models. So if you look at some of the biggest papers in generative AI, you'll see that they're state of the art only in English. So I think one of the best recent examples was both the BERT paper and GPT-2, and there are others as well. There's at the time, the two biggest papers were not state of the art for named entity recognition, so identifying the names of organizations, places, and people in text. And they all worked on, they evaluated on this data set, sometimes referred to as Connell 2003. So it was a shared task in 2003, which I was one of the participants in as an undergraduate 20 years ago. And the actual name of the data set is multilingual NER. And it's English and German. It's not like German is a particularly low resource language, right? But it compounds in ways that English doesn't. It has more suffixes and prefixes, it has gender. And in these early papers, you'll see only one set of results reported. And it's just the English results. And it wasn't until papers came out later and looked at these earlier models on German that said, oh yeah, it was actually though less than some existing non-generative AI approaches for German, because these assumptions about English and word order didn't hold. And some of the subword modeling that we have in models now improves things, but like there is this gap that the assumptions we made for English, especially word order, especially with generative text, it just works better with English compared to other languages, and then this can compound. So tools built on the building blocks of AI, which is better in English, will in turn be better in English, and then people are more likely to focus on a language like English, where there's more available training data, and the results are already higher because of the baked-in assumptions. So that's true of language technology. And I've seen lots of good papers about how this is also true of speech recognition systems being better on dominant languages, the dominant variants of those languages. and computer vision as well. So great papers and things like object detections on for items in supermarkets are more accurate for items that tend to be purchased by more wealthy people. So there's so many ways that if we're not mindful, we will I think you used the word disparities, that we will expand those disparities rather than address them.
Right. It's wonderful talking to an expert such as you, because really every answer kind of raises 10 new questions that we can talk about. But I'm first of all mindful of your own time, and also the fact that we went a little bit overboard in what we had planned for this webinar. But Rob, I really like to thank you so much for the time that you gave us today, and for the wonderful insights that you shared. And if we can have the opportunity to have you on here again, we would absolutely jump on it. And I hope this was a nice experience for you as well. And I'm very much looking forward to just keeping in touch and to looking at what you're working on in the coming months and obviously years. So with that, I just like to, I guess, give you the final word to just share. If there's anything that you were hoping that I would ask about and I didn't, now would be a great opportunity for that. And if not, just to let you go on about your day and to wish you a pleasant end of the week.
Yeah, I'm happy to share one additional thought. So to build on the potential to exaggerate economic disparities. One of the best ways to ensure that your models are working as well, or at least to understand whether they're not working well, is to engage people from the communities that otherwise might be left behind. So in the case of language technologies, get speakers of as many languages as possible, employ them fairly to evaluate and create new training data. Let them be involved from the very beginning of a project creation. Let them tell you what the potential downsides are and repercussions of this technology not working well. Let them tell you other sensitivities and even building something in their language without their permission. And who are the right people to ask for permission? It might not be the government of an area that speaks a certain language. That might be a large number of stakeholders. When a community is able to help build out its own technologies that's empowering for that community, they can build on a lot of software infrastructure that was built in other languages, like databases and things where a lot of these assumptions aren't as bad. So it can help tip the balance the other way, where technologies are first made in more dominant languages or wealthier markets, and then all the R&D and a lot of the failures have been discovered there before we take them to people who have more typically been left behind. So yeah, there's definitely a positive side to it, and one of the best ways to involve people is on the data side of things. So for a company like Humans in the Loop or any data labeling company, you're in a good position to help address a lot of the problems that we see today. Yeah, really, thank you for that. And yes, for a diverse organization working on the data side of the AI domain, really, we're very happy to explore any such opportunities. So we'd love to stay in touch with everyone that has been together with us today live for this webinar, and also to the people that will view the recording afterwards. Once again, Rob, thank you very much for taking the time, for coming on, and for the wonderful insights that you shared. It was a pleasure having you, and we'd be proud to have you again. I just want to wish you all the best, and to our audience, a pleasant rest of the day, or and a nice upcoming weekend, I guess. Thanks, Gary. And yeah, thank you for the invitation. It was my pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much, Rob. Take care, and we'll see you soon.